Hey, IB History Scholars, it's Mr. Newcomb, and I want to continue with the session on Topic 10, Authoritarians. This is Part 3, and Part 3 is going to focus on Mao Zedong. He is the leader of the People's Republic of China, which is communist, and that makes him a left-leaning uh, leader. Mao will find himself emerging out of a very chaotic and crisis state that China finds itself in. Early in the 20th century, China suffered from lack of unity and was politically unstable. It was dominated by foreign powers that had carved up China in the 19th century during the era of imperialism. China became a republic in 1912, but the nationalist government was ineffective. It had a hard time controlling the countryside. That's because the warlords dominated it. And so from 1916 to 1928, this was a period of warlordism throughout China, and people did not look for Beijing for guidance, but looked towards their warlord for guidance. The Kuomintang, or the GMD, gained Beijing and established a central nationalist government led by Zhang Zheshih. So the Kuomintang is a nationalist group, and it's closely associated with Sun Yat-sen, who was part of that creating the republic in 1912. To continue with this, in 1921, the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP, was established, but Mao Zedong was not the dominant figure. He was just part of the group. His ideology, though, which centered on the importance of the peasant, was inconsistent with the mainstream Marxist thinking that was more aligned with what was going on now in the Soviet Union. Mao's ideology became defined during his time at Jiangxi. The communists were forced to set up a base there, and they formed a Red Army to defend themselves, against the GMD. GMD again are the nationalists of Kuomintang. They are anti-communist. Still, though, what we have in this process of Mao emerging is in 1934-1935, the historic Long March will go on here. A large group, including Mao, broke out and undertook the Long March in 1934-35. They established a new base, and at that new base, Mao became the undisputed leader and implemented his socialist policies such as land reform. He basically was able to get rid of the 28 Bolsheviks that were a problem for him. The Second Sino-Japanese War in 1937-1945 briefly reunited the GMD and the CCP. Up to that point, they had been engaging in the Civil War. And so he went on the Long March during the Civil War. But now Civil War is put on hold, and both the GMD and the CCP work together. The CCP grew during this time period, and mainly because of what we call the 70-20-10 ratio. 70% focus on expanding their territory and their influence, 20% focused on harassing the GMD, and 10% actually taking care of the Japanese here. After Japan defeated, the Civil War was resumed, and complete victory for the communist position occurred in 1949. Mao then goes through the process of consolidating his power, and so the CCP set up a new structure of government that paid lip service to the democratic principles, but in which the party was dominant and shared many of the personnel of the state government. So basically, you've got the formation here of a government that just mirrors the Communist Party. The army, the People's Liberation Army, was going to be very important here in securing unity and dominance over outlying areas such as Tibet. Bring them back into the fold here. Mao had a vision for the future of China in which he pursued singly-mindedly in the support of extensive propaganda campaigns, working on creating that cult of personality. Mao basically was going to be this architect of China. To go along with consolidating and maintaining power, the mass movements, the local committees, the rectification campaigns ensured surveillance control of the population. Get the people to actually work on helping maintain Mao's power. Although there was virtually no outright opposition to the regime, Mao persecuted rightists and the bourgeois elements throughout struggle sessions and mass campaigns. Rightists were they're communists, but they're more moderate elements of it, and they were just viewed as a threat to Mao. So you had different campaigns take place during a series of years. The 3 Antis campaign, the 5 Antis campaign, really going after corruption, going after abuses, engaging in getting rid of any of the opposition, so those rightist party members. To continue with the consolidation, the police, the courts, the legal systems were entirely in the party's hands, and the prison camps removed opponents and kept others in check. So heavy reliance on the security officers here, military, the courts, all that to maintain the control here. Mao conducted purges within the Chinese Communist Party, brilliant campaign, the 100 Flowers campaign that went on, and then the anti-rightist campaign of 57. Both the campaigns found who the opponents were, purged them, sent them off to the countryside. Mao wanted China to be its own master in the international diplomacy, independent path for communists. Okay, for domestic policies, so now that he has maintained his power, for domestic policies, it's all about building this communist state in China. Mao believed he could turn China into a great world power by putting his specifically Chinese version of Marxism into practice. Living standards were definitely raised by Mao's methods, often worked against the effective implementation of policies, though. So living standards did increase, though, but Mao sometimes, some of his methods got in the way here. Collectivization was introduced in gradual stages. It began with cooperative farms before moving to higher level collectives and finally communes during the Great Leap Forward in 1958. The result, though, was a great famine. So he's going to have to take a step back here, with his economic policies, but step back in the Communist Party. The first 5-year plans began the process of centralized planning, but the model was abandoned in the Great Leap Forward, which proved to be a disaster. So the economy was gradually revived under the direction of Liu Shaoqi and Deng Xiaoping. And while that is going on, Mao is working on finding his way back to power. The Communist Party tried to weaken the power of organized religion in China, and the only patriotic churches were allowed to operate. However, the party's success was limited overall. Religion is tied to tradition, and tradition just seems to be something very difficult for China to let go. There was a successful drive to increase literacy, the socialist education movement, but the growth of education was limited by the party's dislike of intellectualism and the disruption caused by the mass campaigns. And it really is disruptive during the Cultural Revolution. Youths were indoctrinated through youth organizations like the Youth League and the Red Guards. They're going to play a major part in the Cultural Revolution that happens in 66. It goes to 76, although this proved to be detrimental to their broad education. Although there was some tolerance of ethnic and religious minorities, the Tibetans suffered enormously, and the Cultural Revolution affected such groups as well. So when we look at here in regards to more with domestic policies and their impact, the culture suffered as it became a branch of the Maoist propaganda. And the Cultural Revolution not only destroyed some of China's heritage, but also led to the persecution of intellectuals and creative minds. So you had the Red Guard attack the Four Old, which included tradition. The Cultural Revolution was to purify the nation. The rigid censorship forbids all but works of relevant contemporary Chinese themes. China granted equality to women, but in practice, their lives sometimes became more onerous than before. Gained the right to vote, joined the party. However, few were in leadership positions. Percentage of women working did increase. Love for Mao's undermined the importance of the family. Again, with that cult of personality, and divorce rates increased as a result of some of the liberal policies that were being granted to women during the Civil War and right after the Civil War. Mao's regime comes to an end in 1976 when he dies, and it sets up a power struggle for China once he does pass away. This concludes the session on topic 10, authoritarians.